Hey folks, I want to talk to you about this application Readio. I strongly recommend Readio to help grandparents and parents read to their grandchildren remotely when they can't be in the same room. Whether you're living across the country, across the world, or you're just gone on a business trip, Readio makes it easy for you to read to those young ones when you're away. It's a super easy tool that allows for video monitoring across the top of the screen so they can see you and you can see them, as well as having the book prominently displayed, making it easy for you to read to those young ones, or better yet, having them read to you. What I want you guys to do is go to cool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link for Readio, click on that link, and sign up today for your free trial.
Do you also find it difficult to build up a meaningful relationship with your grandchildren at a distance? As a long-distance aunt to a 2-year-old in Australia, I wanted to create solutions for the millions of family members who cannot be physically together all the time. This is why I created Peekabond, an app that helps you to connect with young children at a distance. The app works with the following 3 steps. First, we give playful activities suggestions that are based on your child's development stage. These suggestions are science-based and gamified. Secondly, you can create a private family circle. And finally, we'll let you send videos back and forth so you don't have to be live at the same time, and save them in one spot for your grandchild to watch. We've got over 120 content suggestions. You can build a love bank for your grandchildren. And if you go to the Cool Grandpa website and look for the affiliate links, sign up for a newsletter with a lot of inspiring content, or you can try the app for free.
We have on the show today Winn Egan. Now, Winn and his late wife Linda wrote the book Grandparenting on Purpose. This is a fantastic book that goes through all the different ups and downs in a relationship, not only with grandchildren, but also the parents of those grandchildren. We are going to dive into some fun topics about being over the top with enthusiasm for our grandchildren's events, such as piano recitals, soccer games, whatever you might have, as ways to connect with grandchildren. And then we're also going to explore some of the more painful sides of miscommunication and what happens when a relationship is strained and how you might be able to get back and repair that relationship with your grandchildren's parents. So you guys are in for a treat because we are going to deep dive into how we can be effective grandfathers and use the information not only for strengthening the family relationships, but also so many of these ideas can be transferred to relationships with our spouse and our friends and family in our network. So you're sure to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, let's jump into it and let's get to know Winn. Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Winn. Thank you so much for joining us on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I sure do appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit down and talk with us about grandparenting on purpose and how we can all maybe learn a little bit more about this role of grandfather.
Well, Greg, I'm thrilled to be with you. I really want to be genuinely helpful to grandparents and particularly grandfathers.
One of the things I'd love for you to do is tell us the background about how this book, Grandparenting on Purpose, came about and what prompted you to sit down with your wife and write this book.
Well, briefly, we for about 40 plus years belonged to a study group, people who were contemporaries of ours. We've been doing this for, like I said, 40 years, and we went through the toddler stages, we went through the elementary years, the junior high, high school. We experienced our parents passing away. So we've had this rich relationship with these people for a long time. And one of the couples in the group called us and said, we'd like you to come to our empty nesters group to talk about grandparenting. And so I determined who was going to be there. And because this was a pretty powerful group of people, we had a senator there, a past senator from the United States, a lot of people who'd made some really wonderful contributions. And when I got home, I said to Linda, Linda, I think we have enough for a book. And in short order, we began to outline the potential chapters. And basically, that's the origin of the book, that it came from that one experience and thinking we have maybe something that will be useful and helpful to grandparents.
It's wonderful that when we do some of these side projects that all of a sudden we can have those aha moments and it's like, oh, we can repurpose this and we can share and affect even more people just by changing direction a little bit or adjusting the material.
Yes, that's true. One of the things we did discover is that a lot of people, when they read books that are kind of tied to improving themselves, they feel very guilty. And one of the things we've tried to do at the front end of this book is to say, this book is about you growing, about you are looking for things that could serve as springboard, something that resonates with you, maybe something you can alter a little bit that would be useful to your children, their spouses, and your grandchildren. So that's what it's all about. If somebody feels guilty moving through this, then we've missed the boat, because that's not our intention.
Oh, and I love that, because that's very similar to the intention I have for this Cool Grandpa podcast, in that, I want to capture stories about relationships that either grandfathers have had with grandchildren or adult grandchildren remember about their grandfathers. And every story, every relationship is completely unique. And what might work for one family and one relationship might not work for the other one. So this is awesome.
Yeah. The other thing I think I would say is Linda and I were over the top. We were crazy. We were really insane in terms of our grandparenting. So we honor the fact that we were overboard. And we want people to understand that. We don't expect them. We expect them to be a lot more normal than we were.
Oh, and you guys shared some fascinating stories, and it's easy to see how just over the top you guys were with grandparenting, but also just how much you guys really loved that role of being a grandparent and what you poured into the grandchildren and the adult children as well. So I encourage everybody to pick up this book, read it. There's going to be some great ideas for how you can be over the top with your grandchildren.
Well, Linda, I have to pay tribute to her. In many ways, she was the genius behind this. At the time I wrote the book, I just concluded about 30 plus years as an academic. And the pressure to write and publish and do research at times is really overwhelming. And Linda just had this knack for, looking at a situation or observing a grandchild and saying, Winn, I think we need to do this. And generally speaking, she was spot on. So I hope as people, move through this book, they will say, wow, Linda, she was amazing. And that is in fact true.
Oh, I definitely caught myself as I was listening and reading the book doing that, as well as, I hope I could be somewhat as tuned in as Linda was to the needs of my grandchildren as she was to hers.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, within your studies and within your experience with speaking and writing about grandparenting, what are some of the changes and similarities have you found with this role of grandfather over the years? In that, how do you think the role of grandfather has evolved since maybe over the last 50, 60 years?
Well, I think one of the things that's happened is, if I were to kind of recount and think about the experiences I had with my own grandfathers, they would have been extremely minimal. We went to their homes on holidays, but the degree to which they were engaged in our lives was really pretty minimal. And I think we've seen really an ocean change in terms of what many grandparents do now. All you have to do is go to a soccer game or any athletic event or maybe a recital. A lot of the people, if not most of the people there, are grandparents. And they're attempting to provide support to their grandchildren. They want to see them grow into really good people, really good citizens. They want them to become their very best. So I think what we're seeing now is a different way of thinking about what it means to be a grandfather and what it means to be a grandmother.
Oh, I think you're right on with that, because I know from being a Little League coach myself that it wasn't uncommon when I needed an extra hand to have a grandfather raise their arm up and say, "I'll go out and warm up the pitcher for you, coach, while you're getting the kids all into their positions and things." And it was always a treat to meet these grandfathers that were in the stands, and grandmothers as well. But I do agree with you that I think there's a lot more involvement and even playfulness within this role of grandfather than I think used to be in previous generations.
Well, the other thing that I'm just going to mention in passing, I often got in trouble with Linda that I was way too vocal at these games, but it's amazing what kind of support you can provide to someone. Just saying something like this: "Heather, I want your autograph." You know, the kids thrive on that, on that kind of support. And sometimes you're a substitute. Grandparents, we live next door to a family, and I'm like their third grandfather. And we have a great time together. So we can be focused not only on our own grandchildren, but children who are proximal to where we live, because many grandparents live great distances, from their grandchildren. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later, but the roles that we play are so important.
Oh, I agree with that. In that, too, what I've been finding is when I'm talking with some older men that haven't had families or their grandchildren are far away, there is this need and I think want for this older mentor to be part of a young person's life. And everybody's situations are different, but sometimes there's just something there between having that multi-generational bond and relationship that's different and provides a different set or a different value than having that relationship directly with somebody their parents' age. And
you'll know, Greg, that you're making a difference if the friends of your grandchildren call you Grandpa Winn or Grandpa Greg or Grandpa Diane or Grandma Linda, because they connect with you. And sometimes you're sort of an alternative source of this kind of support and nurturing that they may not have access to with their own grandparents.
And it's interesting because with as much of the technology that's come about and everything that it's supposed to provide more connections and free time and all these things that the promises of the future that seem to, every year it's the same promise about the future, more leisure time, more time for connections. It seems that we're more and more isolated, especially children being in devices. And there's certainly a level of contact that children can have within the device, but it's not the same as having that one-on-one conversation with somebody.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree.
One of the things that I wanted to talk with you about, and this is a little bit of a difficult subject, but it's something that comes up within families, and especially I think sometimes it can be strange to how we handle this as grandparents, is when we do have disconnects with our adult children, maybe their spouses, and maybe the grandchildren. And you have a chapter in your book about this, but can you talk a little bit more about, going through some of these disconnects, some of the reasons why we have disconnects, and then what are some of the things that grandparents can do, and maybe grandfathers in particular, to help reestablish those connections?
That's just a great question. In fact, when we first organized the book and we sent it out for review, many of our dearest friends said, we feel alienated from some of our kids and their spouses. And it would really be useful if you included a section on how do we go about potentially reconnecting. So let me just start with a couple of ideas. Often these disconnects begin during what I call the dating period or the relationship development. And, the grandparents, the parents of this new couple, maybe are concerned about the choices that their child's making with regards to a companion. And so that kind of taints the whole thing. Or they have maybe an episode where they really didn't know how they came across, or the couple asked maybe for some assistance or help, and they were turned down. So there's probably a plethora of reasons why these disconnects come to be so real and so lasting. And sometimes you're completely in the dark. You have no idea what you did, okay, or what you said or what you didn't do that's contributed to this disconnect. So one of the recommendations that we make is that you need to be really upfront, and maybe you need to apologize. And we talk about a 4-step process. And one of them is to identify a time or create a time where you can come together. And it might be just a one-on-one with your son or your daughter or with both. And you first say, this is what our intentions are. We really want to reconnect with you. We love you so much. We care about you so much that we just want to make things right. And if we've done some things that have been harmful or even stupid or unreflective, we want to make things right. So the first thing you do is you share what your intention is. You want to apologize. You want to make things right. You want to hear them out. And then the second thing you do is you forecast, or you say how you hope they will respond. You would say something like this: we hope that you'll sense our sincerity, that we really want to reconnect with you. And we hope that you'll take what we have to say and really sense how serious we are about reconnecting with you. And if we need to take some steps that would, make things right with you, we'll attempt to do that. Then the next thing is, so that's, what's your intentions, and then how do you hope they'll respond? And then you ask them specifically, so let's talk about, is there something that we've done that we did that offended you or hurt you? And then what you do is you listen. And as you listen, you try to get not only what they're saying, but what's underneath what they're saying. And sometimes we recommend that you do a kind of, what's something we should stop doing? What's something that we should start doing? So a stop, start, and what are some things that we're maybe doing that we should continue? And we make a point in the book that you're really looking for a win-win. And one of the great questions that you can ask is, what can we do to make this work? What can we do together to make this work? And then again, you listen, and hopefully because of the dynamic that's there, maybe you make some inroads, and they sense that you really are sincere, you really are authentic in making this request.
Those are all great points. And one of the things that when I was reading through the book that kept going on in my head was, you as a grandfather and grandparents, you've really got to check your ego at the door when you're sitting down for these, because sometimes it's not easy for anybody, but especially for those of us that have a few miles on the tires, to be able to sit down and try to be humble enough to go, maybe I did contribute to this situation. Maybe I said some things that were taken the wrong way. Maybe there's something that I need to work on and improve on. And that can be extremely difficult for some of us old guys to sit there and take that step back. But have you had any experiences with people that you've talked to and have worked with that have had to go through that self-reflection even before starting to do the reconnect process?
Well, I can tell you a couple of stories, but one in particular. We are very familiar with a grandmother who had a brand new grandchild. And she decided that on a given occasion, when this grandchild came to their home, that they would take some pictures of them doing various kinds of things, which were all very positive and uplifting. And she posted them, in the social media, probably Facebook, and discovered after the fact that the parents did not want their child featured in any social media of any kind. And I would say for more than several months and maybe even years, this really prevented them from wanting to spend time with this grandmother and grandfather. And fortunately, the grandmother and grandfather were sufficiently patient that they apologized profusely. And over time, by just manifesting this patience, this compassion, and not trying to rush or push a change, it's interesting, this spring, they're headed for a Caribbean trip with, not only that grandchild, but another grandchild, and they'll spend an entire week together. So a lot of it is just being patient. We talk about, for instance, holidays. We recommend don't make holidays an issue. Focus on things where you have agreement, where you have this notion that we can be flexible on this. Early on when we were married, there were always this choice. Are we going to go to the Egans? Are we going to go to the Furmans? Are we going to go to the Harmers? And we tried to stay out of those kind of, fights, so to say, or struggles. And I think what happens too is you try to stay focused on the positive, because sometimes it takes a long time. It's one of the things we say, it's really easy to violate a trust in seconds or minutes, and yet it can take a long, long time to regain that. So you just have to be patient. And oftentimes the way you reconnect with, your children and their spouses is by being exceedingly positive with their grandchildren. And the grandchildren, it's so interesting. Here, the other story was we have another couple that we knew really well, and they all of a sudden had this, we're not going to talk to you anymore. We're not going to come over. And what happened is the little kids missed their grandparents so much that it forced the parents to reconsider, because the grandchildren had such a great time being with their grandparents. So there are a lot of ways to look at this, but it's kind of comes back to how can we make this work? How can we recreate or rebuild the relationships that we've lost?
That's a great story. And I love the fact that grandmother and grandparents are able to now go vacation in Mexico with the grandchildren, that resolved itself in a good outcome.
But it took a considerable amount of time. And if you were to meet these people, they're about as angelic and nice as they get. They just made this fatal mistake of posting these pictures and had no idea what the ramifications would be.
Now, do you think that sometimes these disconnects, or in let's say it's not even a full disconnect, but just friction between the adult children, their spouses, and the grandparents can sometimes come about just because grandparents aren't either learning and sitting down and having those I don't know, I want to say meetings, but meeting's not the right word. Finding out what that new couple's boundaries and rules are. And sometimes grandparents might have the inclination, either on purpose or by accident, just to kind of steamroll through that.
Oh, Greg, I think that's brilliant. We should have had you contribute that paragraph or those pages, because essentially what you're saying is when you have a new unit come into your family, you know, you have your son or your daughter and their spouse, their companion. I think that's a great idea where you sit down and say, we really want to be grandparents that are cherished, and we want to be genuinely helpful and supportive of you. So help us understand what would be really useful, what would be helpful to you, and then go from there. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. And I think too is that to me, it goes back to a lot of, you know, we can look at the workplace or informal teams or whatnot, but the expectations and missing those expectations and assumptions on both sides can really lead to that kind of a disconnect and that kind of a friction within the relationship. Now, what advice, and maybe you've come across it, maybe you haven't, what advice do you have for grandparents that have been trying to reach out, trying to get a conversation started, and there just isn't any interest with that, with the adult child and their spouse?
You know, it's a great question. It's probably one of the tougher questions that you pose, because sometimes you have to decide what is the likelihood of our making some headway or progress with regards to this relationship. And I think what you do in that situation, if you think it's pretty bleak and it's unlikely that you're going to get any resolution, then you kind of take a step back and say, we're not going to make our happiness as grandparents dependent on our relationship with these two or with these parents. But what we are going to do is, when we see opportunities to maybe make some inroads or to make a very small incremental difference, at the end of that chapter, we talk about cards, and letters and things that you do that create an opportunity for connection, because sometimes you can't predict when somebody's going to kind of cool off. And some of the fervor that's associated with a misstep or something that you did, they now put in perspective. So I think what you do is you just look for avenues. In the book, we talked about one episode that we had. I wouldn't even call it an episode, an event. So we had all the families come to our home. And Linda put out, in our bedroom, all of her jewelry that she wanted to be able to make available to the granddaughters. And they drew a number out of a hat. And it was so much fun. And when they got home, they had something that came from their grandmother. And I think it's very possible that in the next generation, they'll say, this belonged to Grandma Linda, and I want you to have this, or you can choose from these 5 items that all belong to your Grandma Linda. And I remember the very day that we went to their home. This is how old I was, and we picked this off the bed. So I think you're continually looking for ways to reconnect, and you're really patient about that. And often your avenue for reconnecting is through your grandchildren.
Oh, that's a great story. I really enjoyed it when I was reading through that, because I could see, and you guys did a great job of framing this story up for us, that in the book, you get the sense of, Linda being there, and then all the granddaughters and daughters and daughter-in-laws and everybody there, and having the shared experience. And I could almost, the way you guys described it, I could almost hear the, the laughing going back and forth, and maybe some of the good-natured teasing about like we all do when let's say, because we're guys, let's say here's a bunch of baseball cards, and the good looking and the fun about like, oh, don't pick that card. That's the one I want, and some of those.
And the other thing that would happen, they'd say, oh, Grandpa, I got earrings, I got a necklace and I got a ring, and they all go together. It was so cool.
Yeah. I imagine for some of those granddaughters, that might have been the first real matching set of jewelry that they had, and it was grandma's.
Yeah, it was grandma's.
Now, one of the things I really liked about your book too, and we're going to pivot a little ways away from the disconnect and the reconnect, and let's talk about the connections, because you and Linda brought up in the book some really great ideas about how to welcome men and women that are dating your children into the home, and then especially as then it goes into engagements and then marriage. Would you want to talk a little bit about that, and how, even though it's not related to grandkids directly, it is related to how, as adults, we can set the tone of welcoming that new member of the family in?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we have done that's a little bit extreme, remember, we were way over the top, is that we did cheap but good dinners. And essentially what we did is our grandchildren obviously went to dances, and dances now and other related events are multi-element events. You do something in the morning and what have you. And often they spent a lot of money at a restaurant providing a meal for their date. And so Lynn and I decided, look, we'll have you come to our home. So it could be the girls coming or the guys, but let's say it was the guys. The guys said, oh, this is going to be great. And I said, we'll teach you how to make a really fantastic dinner. We'll teach how to set the tables. We'll teach how to make homemade rolls. And it's just so much fun. So they'd come on a given night. We'd make the dessert. We'd set the tables. We did everything that you would do to have just a really great dinner. And then we added another dimension. So we got their younger siblings to be the waiters and waitresses. So for them coming to the dinner, they went, oh, this is kind of cool because I get to see what it means to date and what you say and how you act. And we did that with both our granddaughters and our grandsons, and we even did it for our neighbors. It just turned out to be an amazingly fun thing for us and for them. And I remember some of the waitresses and waiters saying to their brothers or sisters, look, we expect a really good tip. We're going to work really hard. And so everybody had a lot of fun. And of course, some of those relationships culminate in more serious relationships, but you're always trying to be welcoming. And again, the people that came to our home, we were sort of like their secondary grandparents. And it would not be unusual to get a call a couple of years later and say, hey, Grandpa Winn, this is so-and-so. Can you tell me how we made that Egan punch? Or can you send me the roll recipe? Or that dessert was killer. I want to make that for, our family. So that's one example. Another one that's, again, probably way over the top is what we called college kids night. Now that sort of makes the assumption that a lot of your kids are going to college in a town that's close to yours. And essentially what we do is we'd say, just invite your roommates, whoever, and we're going to have a really simple dinner, and then we're going to watch a really provocative video. And when I mean provocative, I'm talking about an old video that has some nice instructional elements. So one of the things we did is we watched the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Sidney Poitier.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And one of the guests that came, he said, that was dope. That was one of the best movies I've ever seen. Why haven't I seen this before? So we watched the movie, and then we had this, fantastic discussion. So dinner, movie, discussion. Everybody had a great time. Another example that's kind of like that is We had another college kids night that was close to Valentine's. So you have college students there, guys and gals. And we saw a TED lecture, reviewed a TED lecture on rejection.
Oh,
So, because Valentine's is one of those times when you can get rejected in a big time way.
right, right.
But coming back to the notion of people coming, when we have events and we have somebody who's close to getting engaged or whatever, we invite them to come. So they get to see us up close and personal. And what it does too is it helps kids that are younger in your family discover what it's like to maybe make a selection about a partner and kind of what should you look for and what are they like and how do you relate to them. And I just think that there's so much that can be learned when grandparents, again, are purposeful. They have kind of this notion that when somebody's come to an event, not only do we want them to feel welcome, but there's this rich learning environment where you learn about what it means to be social, how to introduce yourself, how to, serve people if you're the waitress or the waiter. So there are these elements, and you're really trying to heighten what happens when they join together.
Oh, those were all great examples. And what I liked about that too is that it was showing some of the younger members of the family what's going on. And I'm sure there had to be a talking to once or twice about, we're not going to tease your older sister like you normally do. This is, teasing tonight is off limits, and having some of those conversations. But
let me inject one more thing,
Sure.
Greg, that's like this. Often when we have a time together, we'll reserve 10 to 15 minutes for a brief, what we call devotional. We don't always use the word devotional because that has kind of an interesting ring to it, but we have an event where we focus on maybe an important point or an important behavior. And after Linda passed away, they all knew that Linda loved toothpicks after, eating dinner. She had to have a toothpick to kind of clean things up. And so on that night, I gave them each one of her toothpicks. And I said, what do you think we're going to talk about? And that was just fun to see the answers that they came up with. But then I said, we're going to talk about tonight what it means to be picky when you're choosing friends and when you're choosing a potential wife or husband. And what we did is we took one of the nieces who'd been married less than 3 months. We asked them to talk about, why did you make the pick you did? Oh, that was amazing. And then a month later, we had their parents talk about why they made the picks they did. So this was that idea of being purposeful and helping children who are young and, teenagers and young adults. Oh, this is what they thought was important. And of course, they get to see it. They get to see how compatible they are, how much they love each other. So that notion of being sensitive to what you can maybe get across or sensitize them to is very important.
I definitely like that example because it did, to your point, it did allow for the family to come together and talk about a particular item. And you do talk about the devotionals in the book, but having the grandchildren and the adult children be there while you discuss something, and then leaving it open as well for their input and their questions and their exploration of the topic. Because I think sometimes, whether it's school or sometimes even church meetings, whatever it might be, sometimes a topic hits and the instructor just wants to keep going. I've got my lesson plan. I've got whatever. I'm just pushing through this. But those moments with a family and grandparents and grandfathers in particular allows, I think, some breathing room that young adults can ask some serious questions that might be a little bit off topic, but it's around what has been brought forward and exposed to them.
Well, the other thing, Greg, that a lot of people do who work with youth groups and young adults is after they've had a very powerful experience. So let's say they've finished a day on a river, rafting or kayaking. And then essentially what you do is you process that experience and you say, as you had this experience today, what were the outcomes? What did you learn from the experience? What really stands out to you about what took place? And, someone might say, quite frankly, I was scared half to death, but I found out that if I kind of just stayed with it, my suds level went way down and I began to enjoy being in a kayak and controlling, where it went. So that notion of giving kids experiences and then having them relate it to their growth, changes that they're experiencing, or to life in general is really helpful.
That's great advice for us grandfathers, that we don't always ask those open-ended questions with the grandchildren or our spouses. Sometimes we can, I think we get into typical guy problem-solving mode where it's, I need the facts, just the facts, and you're asking a very pointed question to get a very direct answer so you can move on with whatever the task is, topic, whatnot. But being able to step back and ask those open-ended questions, especially with the younger grandchildren, so that they can talk about what's on their mind and in their hearts, is super important.
Greg, one thing too that I hope I'm not imposing this right now, but one of the things that's really interesting to me about the role of being a grandfather is that it really starts with what I call listening and observing. So really wonderful grandfathers, they listen to understand and they observe to understand, because they're getting to a point where they go, I see what makes this grandchild or this grandson tick. And then what they do is they become kind of what I'd call an experience provider, where they say, oh, if I just took him fishing, or if we did this together, this would really solidify our relationship. This would really help us advance where we're moving in terms of how we see and experience each other. And then that's kind of gets into the nurturing mode, where you help them discover who they are, what they're capable of. And you're continually kind of thinking, oh, I have this, we call it a calling to be a grandfather. And charting this new course that we talked about, the new grandfathers are nurturers. They're event planners. They're great listeners. They're great focus providers. And they serve as major adjuncts to their parents. And of course, by permission, you're not imposing things, but you're being genuinely helpful to them.
Couldn't agree more. That's one of the items that I talk about and have been brought up on many of these conversations, is how important it is when the grandchildren are young to be there and asking those questions and finding out, when you're going for a walk down the sidewalk with your grandchild and all of a sudden they stop and they're looking down, and your goal was, I'm going to walk around the block with the grandchild, but the grandchild sees there's ants on the sidewalk and what's going on with the ants. But it opens up that discussion that a grandfather can take advantage of, hey, where do you think the ants are coming from? Where do you think they're going? What do you think is going on? And that little conversation sparks a curiosity within them that they might want to go out and search for those answers. Maybe they go back and they crack open a biology book or do a search about ants and ant behavior. So I think we'd never quite know what our impact is on those grandkids until after they have a chance to talk about it and bring it back to us and talk about, hey, Grandpa Winn, remember when we saw those ants? And so now I'm doing this big biology project on ant behavior.
Yeah. Or you get them a book about ants, or you get them a shirt with an ant on it, or you do some research and say, I know you're really interested in ants, but I've found these ants, these cutter ants, whatever, you found an interest and then you capitalize on it.
Yeah. And, it's important, I think, too, to understand and for grandfathers to give ourselves a little bit of some grace. And we're here to help support them and help the parents with those grandkids. And to your point, all those attributes that you're saying now are, let's call it a modern grandfather, so to speak. We're there for that if we want to be purposeful in pouring ourselves into those grandchildren. Because they're, as much as we think that the grandkids are there for us, we're really here for them.
That's so true. That is so true.
Now, when I would like to pivot a little bit and talk to you about family traditions, it's something that I've asked several different guests about. It's something that, for me, it feels important as a grandfather to try to figure out the place of family traditions, and maybe even family traditions in general, and then specifically family traditions of coming of age type traditions for grandchildren. Because I feel like our society and culture and things that are, and I'm not trying to say, oh, woe is me, end of days, whatever, but it's a little bit of, I don't think we find these coming of age traditions outside of the home very often anymore. And I think those are kind of important. So would you mind talking a little bit about starting family traditions in general, and then your thoughts about coming of age type traditions with grandchildren?
Well, the first thing I would suggest is you start them early. And basically you have this sort of experimental focus that, oh, this might work, so let's try. If it doesn't, maybe we need to modify it or change it. So one would be to start early. The other thing I think we need to know is that tastes and changes with regards to traditions change over time. And something that's really interesting to a toddler or a preschooler or a very young child may not be that great for a teenager. So you have to have this capacity to shift. When we talk about traditions, let's kind of define what really great traditions are. One is they are fun. Another one is that they are engaging. Another one is they are not boring. Another one is they signal certain kinds of things. So for instance, you can tell that you've come to a dinner at our home. We talked about the Egan clam dip, that if you don't get there early, okay, it will be gone. So it's something that motivates people to be there, but it also signals, wow, this is a tradition that's associated with virtually every major family dinner we have. Another one, if we wanted to amp it up a little bit, is the Egan punch. So traditions often involve food, and food that plays a memorable role. You can just think of Thanksgiving and pumpkin pie or pecan pie and that smell. The other thing about traditions is they're action oriented. You're actually doing something. And traditions that center on cooking, creating, making, doing, those are really going to work. And I'm sure that you probably remember the Christmas car races.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So we've been doing this probably now for 15 years. And of course, we've exposed maybe hundreds of people to the Christmas car races. They could be used almost any time. But these Christmas car races are of course, cars they're called pullback cars. If you go to Amazon, there's hundreds of them. And what we do is we're close to March Madness. Well, we're in it right now. This will date the material where you have, these universities that are competing, and you finally get to the Sweet 16, the 4, the 2, and the 1. Well, you do the same thing with the car races. And the kids, they go crazy because it is so much fun. And we try to randomize the selection. So I might buy 20, 30 of these pulled back cars for our Christmas car races. And then you draw a number out of the hat to choose your car. This year, the very best cars were Jeeps.
Okay.
Okay. But the thing about it is, first of all, kids like competitive things. And again, here's that purposefulness. What do you do to be a good loser? What does it mean to be a gracious winner? How do you deal with defeat? So it has a lot of rich potential for learning and kind of making sense when you lose a heat in a race. So I think the traditions that are the very best have those characteristics that we've talked about. You know, they involve food, they involve doing, they involve creating, cooking. For instance, making donuts, decorating heart-shaped cookies for Valentine's and taking them to neighbors or taking them to your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And they're so meaningful because they have all these side effects. You know, if you're doing the car races, you learn how to be both competitive, but you'll also learn how to lose and how to win. And there's only one person who wins those car races.
Right.
Because most of the people lose. Okay. So the focus there might be losing. So the traditions that we talk about are things that are repetitive, that are meaningful, that are social in nature, and kids love them. And you have to be willing to say some traditions evolve. Like if they were to go tonight or during the day to our website, they would see the Christmas car races. And our son, who's past 50, added a new element to the car race, and that was head-on collisions. Okay, so we wouldn't recommend that, obviously.
Right.
But the kids love it. And again, they're rich with meaning, both social and otherwise. So there's our take on traditions.
Oh, sure. No, those are fun. And there's a lot of explanation in the book about those family traditions and the car races for sure. Very entertaining. Yeah.
I have to inject this.
Yeah.
We talk about Nate in the book. Nate is a 40-plus-year-old man with disabilities. And we have the Egan Turkey Bowl. And sometimes we'll have like 6 teams playing flag football and ages from, 10 to 70.
Sure.
And so you can be the quarterback or you can be the tight end, you can be the center. And with him, it is just glorious because during the time that we're playing, the team that he's on, he'll have an opportunity to run for several touchdowns. And kids know how to feign, tackling and getting juked, so to say.
Right.
And he exits that event just feeling on top of the world. And of course, the kids who are with him get an understanding. What does it mean to be inclusive? What does it mean to give someone an opportunity to really take it to the top?
Right. And as well as I think when I've been in similar situations, it gives you a sense of really feeling that positive feeling of doing something for somebody else, making somebody else feel good. Mm-hmm. And that's just as important. Well, when I've had you on for a while, is there anything about grandparenting or grandparenting on purpose that I haven't asked you that you would love to talk about?
It's been a real privilege for me to spend this time with you. I think what we can do is because, people can only take so many minutes of this, right? So I think what we ought to do is just wrap it up. I think just to put maybe the cherry on the top, grandparenting on purpose, from my perspective, is all about getting to know your grandchildren and their parents well enough that you can develop and sustain positive relationships with them. And if you have positive relationships with your children and their spouses and your grandchildren, then you have an opportunity to be helpful to them and you have an opportunity to be powerfully influential in their lives, making a difference.
Oh, that's great. And I can't add on to that anymore. That was a great reminder for us. And so Winn, we're definitely going to have you back on and pick your brain a little bit more about grandparenting and being a grandpa. But I just wanted to say thank you once more for being on the podcast and spending this time with us. I really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
What a cool conversation with Winn. There was so much good stuff in this book, Grandparenting on Purpose, that I'm sure if you haven't read it already, you are going to be surprised and inspired by the stories that are there. Now, I'm going to put a link to that book in the show notes, so be sure to go there to find that link so that you can order that book. Also, too, you can find this book on Audible as well, and it's a great one to listen to. Now, one of the things that was really impactful for me was our discussion about the disconnects that can happen within family relationships, and then the reconnections that we as grandfathers and grandparents, the steps that we can do to try to create that bridge and reform that foundation. And maybe you're in a situation where you just haven't had that great relationship with your kids, and you're at a point in your life that you're wanting to have that better relationship so that you can get to know them as well as getting to know and connect with your grandchildren. So if you have found this interview helpful and inspiring, do me a favor. Please like and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And be sure to share this inspirational conversation with somebody in your network that could use a little pick-me-up and use some inspiration on how to enhance their already formed relationships. Do me a favor as well. Leave myself and Winn a comment about one of the items that we discussed that's really impacted you. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear how this book and this conversation has helped you in your relationships. So until next time, I want you to remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.